Welcome to Aspects of Writing with your host, James Kelly. For the next 60 minutes, we'll explore every aspect of writing, including how to create, format, and even sell your work. Now let's get right. Here's your host, James Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. My co-host for today's show is Janet Corsi. My guests are Stephen Murray, Andi Scully, and Pam Winn. The topic of today's show is Finding the Writer in You. We always like to start the show with a few fun quotes, so I'm going to ask my panel to start out. And Jan, would you like to read the first one?
I'd love to, James. Hey, everybody. The road to hell is paved with works in progress by Philip Roth.
All right, and Pam.
Hi, I'd like to thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome.
And the quote is from Stephen King. The road to hell is paved with adverbs.
So it's all right.
Yeah.
And Andi?
Hi, thanks, James. This is from Doris Lessing. There are no laws for the novel. There never have been, nor can there ever be.
And Stephen.
And I too would like to thank you, James, for having me on your show, and thank your listeners for tuning in, and welcome back on the air.
Yeah.
I'd like to quote Jules Renard, "Style is to forget all styles."
That's right. All right. Again, today's topic is Finding the Writer in You. Our guest is author Pamela Winn. Pam is an avid reader. Our first guest is Pamela Winn, and she's an avid reader. In fact, she is in the top 10 of the readers on Goodreads. She tries to read between 1 to 6 books a day, in addition to writing her own. Pam has expressed to me that she is on a journey to write 50 books in 5 years. And her writing varies from children's books with 30 pages to supernatural science fiction novels with over 600. So where does the urge to read and write come from? Pam?
I get it everywhere. Most of the time, I think I find my stories just when I lay down at night to go to sleep. And before I get into my dream world, I'm in my supernatural world and the stories come out.
That's fantastic. When did you begin writing, and how did you discover the writer inside you?
I didn't start writing till the end of 2012 because my husband got sick and we had to move. And we moved so quickly that we almost didn't grab like my short stories and things that I had written. And when we got moved, I said, I'm putting these into books. And then I started, and the next thing I know, I have almost 50.
That is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, because like you said, like we mentioned earlier, your goal is to have 50 books in 5 years, so you're just 2 away from that.
I'm 2 away, and I have to have them done by October, but they're both started, so
All right.
I think I'm going to make it.
All right. We're going to talk more about how you did that in a little bit. Our next guest is Andi Scully, and Andi is an up-and-coming author. Andi, tell us why you decided to become a writer.
Well, for as long as I can remember, I just always enjoyed expressing myself through writing, and it always just brought joy to my life.
Okay.
So I decided that it needs to be shared.
But was there something specific that someone told you about that made you decide you wanted to do this?
Well, what got me started this time was I heard about an organization called Nanowrimo, which stands for National Novel Writing Month. And they have an annual, we'll call it a competition, where the goal is to write the first draft of a novel in 30 days. And for most people, that's a pretty difficult challenge. It needs to be at least 50,000 words. That's how they define a novel, as of 50,000 words or more. So I decided that I was going to take on the challenge and try getting a first draft done.
How on earth would you ever find time for that?
I informed my family that it's always November, and I informed my family that for the month of November, I was off limits to them.
That's about the only way you could do it.
All right. And the next author we have on the show is Stephen Murray. And Stephen, you've been on the show before, but can you please tell our audience a little bit about you?
Yes, it has been a pleasure to be on your show before, and certainly a pleasure to be back again. I'm a Las Vegas resident of 14 years, and before that in California. I consider myself a world traveler. I've been to all continents, to almost 40 countries, and I have 3 published novels, which I'm very, very pleased about, and looking forward to getting the fourth one done.
Well, Stephen, I know that you've got 2 out that I just dearly love, and they are romance novels, and they're hard to put down. But now you've written a murder mystery. Can you tell me a little bit why you strayed away from romance to go to murder?
Well, I hope the murder mystery is going to be equally as hard to put down, Jan.
I do too.
In terms of writing romance, that was never really my intent. I had originally written a book about my travels, but being as green as novice as I was told that people are reading romance fiction, so that's what I wrote. And I just wanted to write something different, and I had this idea for the murder mystery, and so that's where I went with it.
Well, going from a heart-melting love story to murdering somebody has got to be a definite turn.
Has definitely a twist.
Yeah.
All right, if you're just tuning in, my name is James Kelly. I'm the host of the show, and Janet Corsi is our co-host. And also we have on the show today Pamela Winn, Andi Scully, and Stephen Murray. And the topic of today's show is Finding the Writer in You. Stephen, we've talked about this before, but give us a little bit of an idea of what it's motivated you to become a writer.
Well, I came to writing pretty late in life, in a way, I suppose. I always enjoyed writing, and of course I have a computer business, so I've been writing computer software for 40 years, but that's obviously different than books. I decided I wanted to write about my travels originally, and that's what started me off on the writing kick. And I just wanted to put all my experiences down. And through that, I discovered a real joy of writing, and since then I just haven't been able to stop. I just enjoy the challenge and the creativity, and it's a very, very relaxing hobby, and I really enjoy writing and the people I've met through it. It's been a wonderful experience.
And, Andy, you already expressed a little bit about why you decided to write. You have anything else to add to that, or?
Well,
journalism was not your background, that we know.
No, my educational background is actually accounting information systems. Very far cry from writing.
And see, this is what always fascinates me about the authors, is that every author, there's a different background. You don't have to have a journalism background to become an author. And a lot of people think, I didn't study journalism, or English wasn't my major, so perhaps I should choose something else. But it's the creativity that's important. So
It's the creativity. A lot of time I love wrestling with finding just the right word, and I get a little ping of joy when I get it phrased just so. I think I've mentioned to you before that I'm a member of Toastmasters, and there's a lot of creative writing in that, and so writing a novel was really just a step up from writing a speech because it's a lot longer.
All right. And Pam, I know you know this because you sent me this information. I believe you have what's called a disorder called hypopangogia.
It's something like that. I had to Google it because I wasn't sure what it was.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about that because I think there's a lot of writers out there who are constantly writing new projects. The four of us, and Pam, we even spoke with you 2 weeks ago. We got together and just had an impromptu talk. While we were waiting for the studio to be finished.
Right. And
so we didn't write.
Took a while for the paint to dry on the walls.
Yeah. So we just ended up talking instead of recording. But what was interesting is that we're finding that a lot of people have this condition. Probably not as bad as you have it. I mean, my goodness gracious, you read so many books in addition to what you're writing. That's just incredible. But I was telling Jan, we were sharing how even I'm constantly creating things. I just wrote a new book yesterday, or started a new book yesterday. That's 3 in 2 weeks. Nothing compared to what Pam's doing, but give us a little more about what you've learned about this disorder.
Well, maybe what we should do is also, according to Wikipedia,
Okay.
the hypnagogia, I'm going to call it, is the experience of transitional state from wakefulness to sleep. The hypnagogic state of consciousness during the onset of sleep. Mental phenomena that occurs during this threshold consciousness phase includes lucid thought, lucid dreaming, hallucinations, and sleep paralysis. So, Pam, take it from there.
But I don't get the sleep paralysis part of that because I just seem to move all the time. But I know when I go to fall asleep, I think in my head, okay, where am I? And then all of a sudden the book that I'm in the middle of writes itself.
Yeah.
And hopefully by morning I can remember what it was because I don't want to get up in the middle of the night because I'm too lazy to do it. So hopefully they connect by the time I wake up.
I actually write the same way, Pam. I do the exact same thing you do. I actually have the dream, but what I've made a practice of doing is I'll get up and I'll tell it to someone, or I'll call someone and tell them the story so that I don't forget it. And the other morning, actually yesterday morning, I woke up and I had an incredible story, and I got right on the computer and I started writing it. And what was fascinating is in addition to the dream, as I'm writing it, I went right into actually formulating the novel itself. So it's amazing to me that we do this, that's where the thought process comes from. But I guess a lot of people probably do it and don't even know it. You know, a lot of people.
I think so. I think you don't. I think you don't realize it, or sometimes you'll do something and think you've already done it, and I think it's a dream that reappears in your life.
Uh-huh.
So mine end up in the books, but a lot of people, I guess they call it deja vu or something.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's all in the dreams.
Well, the first novel I ever published actually was based on a dream, 12-hour sleep. But that one I did get up at least a dozen times at night, and I would get up and I would write something, go back to sleep, and try to remember where I left off to pick up and dream it some more. Actually, I do that with every dream I have. I'll always go back to sleep and try and pick up where I left off. It's like reading a book, and then I'll just keep dreaming forward. And I think now that we've talked about this before, when we talked about it 2 weeks ago, I think I actually make myself do that. You know, I force myself when I go back to sleep, because like I have 2 little dogs. I'll get up in the middle of the night, let's say 3 in the morning, give them a walk. I'll have been dreaming something, and when I lay back down to go to sleep, I'll make sure I pick up where I left off to finish the dream.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, that's when you need to take your telephone and put it on record. And while you're walking the dogs, record what you just dreamt, just in case you get sidetracked when you go back to sleep.
Yeah, if you had to walk the 2 little dogs I have to walk, you couldn't handle a phone at the same time. They're all over the place. Okay, so I wonder, we were talking, I do wonder just how many authors do this. I'm sure there's a number of authors out there who write this way and don't even realize it. Because I know we talk to people all the time. We had Lance Tobalt and Richard Devon on, and I know they talk about how they have it's kind of like, not a wish list, but it's a list they make that they grab ideas from.
Yeah.
So when they get an idea, they'll write it down, put it to the side. Sometimes they'll incorporate it into a book they're writing. They'll just think, well, instead of making this a separate book, I'll just incorporate this into what I'm writing now.
Right.
And I think if everyone made that practice of, if you have a dream, of just trying to remember anything at all and write it down, I'll bet you could probably create even a lot more from it. So.
I keep Post-it notes in my pocket, and so when I have a thought, I just rip out my Post-it notes and put it down.
Well,
Because I can't trust myself to remember.
I have notebooks all over the place.
Aha.
So-
I knew there
Because
was more.
I write everything longhand, so I have everything half done everywhere.
Okay, that's kind of fascinating in itself as well, that you're telling me that you write everything longhand. Stephen, how do you create your work?
Directly into the computer.
Oh, you do?
Directly, I use Word document and I just type away.
So, Andy, what about you? How do you intend to,
I also use Word on the computer.
Jan?
Oh, yeah, I do the computer. Yep.
Okay.
Got one set up in every room in the house.
Well, I will tell you that, like when I had the dream the other morning, I did get up and put it in the computer. I'm finding that when I have a dream, it's easier for me to just get up in the morning and type it in the computer. But I'm constantly having things throughout the day that if I don't have a piece of paper on me, I'll find a napkin and write something down, or whatever I have, piece of a shopping bag. They don't make paper bags anymore, but and I'll jot it down, and then I'll keep it in a pile, and then when I get ready to write something, I'll pull from that.
I have a little notebook that I keep in my purse, and if that's not around, I use an app on my phone to write ideas in.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm impressed. I'm impressed with all these people who take notes.
Well, a lot of people who write music, when they're out and about, out eating with friends and what have you, and they'll hear somebody say something that they think would be good incorporated into a song. They'll write it down on a napkin or whatever they've got, even the back of their check.
Yeah.
And ask for a copy of their check.
Yeah. Pam, as many books as you write, how can you keep track of of what? I'm really mesmerized by the fact that you can do this. How long does it take you to write one book?
I wrote a book in a week.
Oh my God.
But I average about a month and a half per book.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
I have to say it's my characters, because they take over my books and finish them. Sometimes they don't even tell me till the end of the book.
Yeah.
The last book I wrote, I didn't know who did it. It was a murder mystery, and I didn't know who did it because my characters didn't tell me till the night before the book was finished, and I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden it was, oh, that's who did it. Okay. Guess I can finish now.
Amazingly enough, with my book, I knew before I started writing it how it was going to end. It didn't end that way because my character turned out to be a different person than she started off. And so it couldn't end the way I wanted it to originally, because it wouldn't have worked for her character.
I saw Grisham on the morning show just a couple of days ago, and it's interesting. Obviously, the man sold, I think he sold 300 million copies of books by now, I believe.
I would imagine so.
The thing is that he was saying that what you just said, I'm like you. Sometimes, actually, I do let the characters drive me. They're the ones who show me what direction to go in. And he was saying that he doesn't do that, that he believes a writer creates it as they go. But to me, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You're still letting the character. Because we've talked about this before on the show, how in one book I wrote, I actually allowed, I had a character who wasn't married, and as I'm writing the book, this one couple went on vacation. They took the other guy with them, and I thought, this doesn't make sense because he's going to propose to her, and he would have to have, why would they want this guy hanging around with them? So then I created a wife for him, so it makes sense that, So I had to go back and start from the beginning again, add her into it. So I do think the characters can lead you. I don't agree necessarily with what he said.
Well, isn't it a combination of the two, that the author does develop the character, but also when it comes to the dialogue part, sometimes as you're writing the dialogue, the character will turn and say, no, you've developed me like this, there's no way I would say that.
Right.
And then you've got to backspace and retype. The voices are then speaking to you in the dialogue, but I think the author does create the character originally, in my view. Anyway, that's how
Yeah,
it
but
works for me.
what we're talking about is how you actually characters can lead you in a way you have to change what you wrote. You have to. Like I just said, the fact that you got to add a character or take characters away. Because often when we're writing something, we only see a few characters at a time, like 3 or 4 characters. That's the brunt of the story. But then when you get to the point where you're in a situation to where now this person has to interact with the secretary, so you've got to create the secretary. Or there's someone who has to answer a phone, so you got to create the character who answered the phone. Or you're at a gas station, so you got to create the gas station attendant. I mean, it does lead you. They do lead you down a path that you may not have thought of until you get to that point.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes a minor character will come in and almost take over the book,
Mm-hmm.
which you didn't expect when you first start writing it. It's somebody you wrote in later, and then all of a sudden they're taking over, and you're like, oh, okay. I have to do what they say.
Right, that's right, yeah.
I found that this to be a surprise when I was writing, that I didn't know characters kind of had their own lives. So when my main character started behaving in these strange ways, I was like, wait a minute, but I'm the one writing. But she needed to do that. So that was a real big surprise to me in the process.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to touch a little bit on, all 3 of you are different in where you are with your writing. Andi, you really haven't finished your first work yet.
No, the first draft is done, and I'm in the editing process, and I refer to myself as an author in progress.
Okay. And Pam, you've been writing for 5 years. You've been on mainly, you sell most of your work through ebooks or both? The printed?
I do ebooks and paperback.
Mm-hmm. And then Stephen, your first book came out at what, 3 years ago?
Beginning of 2014, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see, and this is why I wanted everyone on the show, because this is a lesson for Andi.
Thank you.
In that when Stephen was first on the show, he had his first book just come out.
Right.
And actually, Jan, you as well.
Yes.
You were on the show as an experiment.
Right. Yeah, I was an experiment. I was an experiment that went right.
Yeah, because you were actually on the show. We were actually going through the process of what it takes to write.
Yeah, the show is the portion of the show is called Mentoring Jan, and you
Right.
took me all the way from having written it to getting it published. And
Yeah, you actually didn't even have an editor at that time.
no, I didn't have
We went-
anything.
Right. And
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went through the editing process, and then everything.
PR.
And then Stephen's book had just come out, and it had already been published in the sense that you had a nice cover and you were ready to go, but you didn't have an author's page yet. You were working on that.
Oh, I didn't have
No
squat.
Facebook.
I had nothing. I had a flyer that I mailed to all my friends, and I thought it would just, by 6 degrees of separation, land up on the New York Times bestseller list. I had a real cold shower on that one, that's
Yeah.
for sure. But you're right. No, I didn't have squat.
And what about you, Pam? When you started out, what was your thought process in getting it out there? Because it's one thing to write a book; it's another thing to put it out.
I had
for-
no idea what I was doing.
Okay.
I just,
That's
I'm
what
with
you,
we're
Pam.
all that way.
you know, but my son was the one that told me to go to Create Space and put the book on there, and then they link you to Kindle and all that stuff.
Hmm.
So it really wasn't. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. It's the promotion that's the hard part.
Yeah. Well,
For
and then
me.
what about for distribution, though? Do you have a distributor for your books?
No, I just use Amazon and Barnes and Noble, so they're in both places, but they're not in bookstores yet.
Okay.
I'm working on that one.
Well, because this is the part that's important to. We've all learned this as we go, and this is why we have this show, because it's a process that you learn as you go. There's not one set way of doing things. It's really what fits best for you. But one of the things that we've learned, and we'll share this right now, is that when you go to the bigger stores to do book signings, like Barnes and Nobles, they do require that you have a distributor that offers them 55% markup plus returnability. When you go to Create Space, you don't have that option. They do a 40% markup, but you can't return the book. So you make more money through Amazon because Create Space is linked to Amazon. You make more money through Amazon on your royalty, but at the same time, it's harder for you to get the book in the store because Barnes & Nobles won't carry you as an author for signing to do book signings in their store unless you can return the book. And the reason for that is they take your book in the store after you've done a signing. Normally, they'll let you leave some copies in the store if there's a few left over. And the norm is, I mean, there are exceptions, but the norm is that after 3 months, if a book has not been sold, they return them back to the distributor. And that's what they don't offer through Amazon. And that's why Barnes & Nobles is very strict about when you do a signing with them, you have to have your book set up through Ingram to be so that they can return it back if it's not sold.
Yeah.
Right. And Stephen, I know that you've gotten your book in a local Barnes & Nobles,
Yes.
and it's
Two of
staying
them.
there.
Yes.
They haven't returned any.
Not to my knowledge yet.
Because I do know also, I had a few authors in the past, and I did have one author. I was really amazed that the books were in the store for a year before they sent them back. So it was kind of like a shock when I got them because they had already had them a year. Because, like I said, the norm is after 3 months, if they haven't been sold, they return them back to the distributor. I think this is important for people to understand because if you're going to go out there and do book signings, you've got to be prepared that this could happen to you. And you have to be very cautious about how many books that store orders for you. And if you go out to a consignment store and sell your books, you're going to get a good feel for how many books you can sell in one setting. It's not always tried and true, but it gives you some idea. So let's say you go to a signing and you do 2 or 3 consignment signings and you're averaging 12, 15 books at a setting. When you go to a Barnes & Noble's, you want to make sure and let the coordinator know that you don't want them to order more than 15 or 20 books. Because if they order those books and they're in those stores after 3 months, they're going to ship them back to the distributor, and you have to pay for what it costs to print the book and shipping to be returned and then to you. So it can get it eats into your profits. You can turn around and resell the books again because they don't rip the covers off anymore. They used to do that. They don't do that no more. Yeah. So you can still sell them and at least recoup your money, but that's something you have to keep in mind. But Pam, you said you don't deal with that end of it. Is that correct?
I what?
You don't deal with the book signing end of it.
I have not yet.
Yeah.
I would think for me, because I'm in a little place, because I'm Montana, doesn't have a very big population, I would think I would rather just order my own books and then take them places and let them sell them.
Right.
Because I know, like here, they do a lot of the grocery stores and small bookstores will sell your books for you if you want them to, just to do a local artist presentation.
And you know, that's,
and to me, that's better.
Yeah, and that's something that Stephen's learned a great deal on since he's taken off. He's done so well in the sense that Stephen's learned. I'm going to let you talk about this, Stephen. You've learned a lot of different outlets to go into that a lot of people would either be apprehensive of doing so or wouldn't even think of doing it. And can you just share a little bit about where you sell your books?
Well, I just always think that you really do need to think outside of the box when it comes to book signings. And you've got to think of your subject matter. And I have found one senior centers to be very, very receptive, certainly to the 2 books that I put out on the romance ones, if you will, and I'm getting them in there now on the murder mystery. Coffee shops seem to be very, very receptive. And I've even tried beauty salons. I've tried event centers. On my murder mystery, I know there's a murder mystery theater here in Las Vegas, and I'm going to approach them about doing a book signing there. I joined, because they're about Las Vegas Wedding Chapel, I joined the Las Vegas Wedding Chamber of Commerce, and I've had a couple of book signings there. So I think it's just, we've got to think beyond bookstores and bookshops. I think we're all in a mindset of Barnes & Noble and Books or Books and the Writer's Block, and they're great places, obviously, to sell books, but there are other avenues to go to.
Well,
it
and
worked out well for me.
You actually created, you really have created an event at the Senior Center that you host every Wednesday, I think it is.
Well, I just host a book club, but one thing we have implemented is a Meet the Local Author series, and we invite an author to come along and speak one week every month, and that's translated into 4 senior centers. But again, one has to consider the audience too. If you've got a how-to book, for example, or a cookbook, I mean, they're not going to be too receptive. Right. But the one event that has been pretty successful is at the Art Gallery, and that's a monthly event called Pen and Palette, and we have 6 authors come along there every single month, and it's held at an art gallery, and there's art exhibits are changed every month, so we have artists and the authors speaking and selling their works, and cheese and wine, and but again, it's being creative. You've just got to find other venues to sell the books and think outside the box.
Yeah,
we
even had a book signing at the store I work at.
Yeah.
At,
Volvo,
yes. Volvo of Las Vegas, and it was a great success. We had a blast. We had 15 authors, and Stephen here was one, and
that's right.
Judy Shine Logan, and even James, or not James, but James should have been there. Jerry Royce, left-handed pitcher for the Dodgers, and it was a kick. We had a blast.
I think Pam does have one slight advantage in as much as you said, you live in a small town in Montana, so you can sort of sell it in the local stores and things like that. In Las Vegas, we do have a bit of a drawback there because In our supermarkets, they all say, oh, we can't sell your book even though it's local. We have a person that comes and puts all the books in the bookstores, and you can't do anything in the casinos either.
Right.
There's all kinds of hurdles and restrictions, and so I'm not too sure that Pam will encounter those same restrictions that we have.
In fact, even in the gift shops at the casinos, they order through just like a bookstore. Through a distributor.
Yes.
So
Out
and
of
if you're
Chicago,
not,
they're all out of Chicago.
So so you do have to think of that way. When you started marketing your book, Pam, how did you market your books?
I do mine online, like in the groups on Facebook or like Twitter, because I have 18,000 followers on Twitter.
Wow.
So that's how I get the
Great.
word out about the books, and word of mouth. I mean, I have so many people that read a book or read 50 of the books, and they tell their friends, and they tell their friends, and people are wonderful that way, and the reviewers are so good. When someone writes you a review and says, oh, your book made me cry, or whatever they say, and it is wonderful, and somebody else reads that, and they're like, oh, I got to pick up this book,
So do you post?
But I sell way more ebooks than paperbacks.
Okay.
And maybe that's why,
Yeah.
because I am more of on the internet,
Do you post your reviews, all your reviews online? Like, let's say there's one specific book, and you get a review for that book. Do you post that with that book online under your ebooks, or how do you post your reviews? Where do you post them? Goodreads?
I post, when I get a review, I try to put it like in a Facebook group or something, thanking the person that gave me the review, and then putting a connection to the review. But some, you have 20 or 30 reviews, so it takes a while per book, because I have like 500 for all the books.
Wow.
And I do the same thing when I read books, because I read so much. I have a page on Facebook, so I post the review I did, and then I also try to find the person whose book it was, so I can put a connection on their page letting them know I read their book, so they can go look at the review also.
Do you seek out reviews, or do people just send in reviews?
They what?
Do you seek out for someone to do a review for you, or do you just get them?
I usually just get them. I mean, when I post the book that the new book comes out or something, then I just start getting reviews.
Okay.
I usually don't request a review from anyone.
All right.
I think I'm scared to. Because you never know. I mean, if it's someone that's close to you, you're afraid that they will either be too nice to you on your review, or there might be someone online that you don't get along with that may give you a bad review just because they don't like you.
Right. Yeah. There's always that danger. Yeah. Andy, do you have any
I
questions?
haven't had a lot of problems with that.
On what we're talking about, do you have any questions? Because you haven't delved into any of this yet.
Right. This is all I know ahead of me, and as I'm listening to Pam talk about all these things, my wheels are turning, but I'm not ready to ask questions yet.
And Stephen, you've gone so far since 3 years ago. How would you view what you went through from when you started out 3 years ago to now?
Oh, I wouldn't trade this journey for the world. I really wouldn't. It's the people that make it, and I've just found I do like doing the book signings. I like doing the presentations. You meet a lot of wonderful people. I've met a lot of wonderful authors, and especially on the Wedding Chapel books, people will come up to you at a Barnes & Noble doing a signing, and they'll say, oh, I got married in a Wedding Chapel, and they tell you their life story, and it's just been a wonderful journey. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's hard work. There's no question about it. It takes a lot of time keeping your Facebook page up, your websites up.
We talked about that the other day, that there's a lot of time spent with posting your reviews or answering emails regarding someone's question or whatever that people don't even see or understand. And Pam, if you've got 50 or 48 books out there, I can't imagine how you have to answer to people.
I'm just having fun. I just am enjoying every minute of it.
Do you
I
sleep?
do. No, because I'm writing books.
Yeah,
Actually, I do have a question.
Sure.
Have any of you delved into trying to get into your local libraries, and how hard is that?
My first book
For
was...
me, it's hard.
My first book was in the
I've
library.
talked to the library here,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very funny about who they put in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would rather go other places than the local library.
Okay.
Stephen,
I
what's
miss
your
the
experience?
old libraries,
Yeah.
by the way.
The experience I've had with the local library, they do like to see some kind of professional reviews somewhere along the line. They did take my first book, and once the first book is in, they took the second one very easily, and of course it was on a local subject. And the third one, they have ordered some more. I did get an email from them saying they have ordered some of those, even though there wasn't a professional review out at the time. I think part of that's because they do have my other two books in the library, and they do have a murder mystery club that meets at the library too. So
Yes, they do.
they wanted the book, and I think they reached out to the library to see if they would carry the book as well. So yes, I've got all three in the library, and I would approach them. I think you'll find they're quite receptive here.
Well-
Okay. Thank you.
And one of the things that you hit on is the fact that they put your... How did you go about getting your book in the library? Was there a form you had to fill out? What did you have to do to...
You have to send you have to send them like a cover of the book and the synopsis and any professional reviews that you've got, and a reason why you think they should sell it. I don't recall there being an exact form per se, but I did send off some reviews that I had actually got on the book. And as I said, I think because the first one was of a local nature, it was probably easier to get in, perhaps.
Now, when you're saying professional review, what are they considering a professional review?
Well, I don't think they'll just consider some reviews written by friends. If you've got something from either, I think I submitted one from Books or Books bookstore that I'd received. I'd also got one from Reader's Digest and Reader's Favorites. I think those they consider prestigious or professional reviews.
Mm-hmm. And I know how you got your books because you did a signing at that store. So that's what I'm trying to get at. We need to let the listeners know how you go about getting these. And sometimes it's just like Roger DeBlanc in Las Vegas works at the library, and he'll write reviews. He does a great job writing reviews for people.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
He's
So
terrific.
it's finding someone who's in that profession, I think is what you're saying they look at, is who is writing this review.
Yes, I think it's where it came from, whether it's somebody that has any credibility, and if you've entered it to any contest or anything like that where you've got honorable mentions or something along those lines, I'm sure that helps.
Mm-hmm. Pam, have you sought out any what we're talking about, professional reviews, or you get so many, I don't even know how you sort through them.
I don't really worry about that.
That's good. That's good.
But I do. I'm trying to do well. Like here, like in Montana, like I said, it's small. There's probably less people in the whole state of Montana than in the one city of Salt Lake. But like here, we have a rural magazine that the electric company puts out, and it goes out statewide. And so they have said they're going to put my books in there, just the advertisement and stuff where they do the local author. But just to have something like that puts you out statewide.
Yeah, that's
And then,
great.
because we get a lot of tourists up here, they pick up, they're laying in the doctor's offices, these magazines, and, so you get a lot of people just seeing it by that.
Mm-hmm. And
to me, that's easier than trying to go through a bookstore, per se, and going in and saying, well, I want to do a book signing and trying to arrange everything. This way it just goes out to everybody, and then it has the links to the books in the article so they can just go to where they want and find the book themselves.
Yeah, and, what's interesting about what you're doing is we always talk about when you're an author, you need, especially if you're going to try and approach a major publisher, you always want to have more than one book ready to go. You always have to have at least a second one or a third one down the pike, because no one's going to pay attention to you if you don't. It's just difficult to go out there with one book and garner any attention, because no one knows who you are. What's probably been the hardest thing, Stephen, for you when it comes to, I mean, I know a lot of local people know who you are now, obviously. You've done a lot of events, you do your book clubs, all that. Well, what's probably been the hardest thing for you to get recognition as far as people noticing your name now as an author?
Well, I think that beyond the first book, I think it's getting the first one out there. That was the toughest of all.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. I think once the second one came out, then you do have a bit of recognition. As you said, it's much easier to sell. If you've got more than one book, it's easier to sell 2 books, and now I've got 3. It's easier to sell 3 books, especially because they're different genres. But really getting that first one off the ground was very, very tough. And just getting the book signings. The one advantage I did have, again, is because the book is about Las Vegas and a fictional Las Vegas wedding chapel, and one of the sources that was a great help was the radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
And across the country, once you say you're from Las Vegas and your book is about Vegas, it's about a wedding chapel, and we're the marriage capital of the world. A lot of radio stations across the nation were interested in that subject matter, and I think especially because it was written by a guy, I think it's that added a little bit more of an interest. So I did have the good fortune of getting on a lot of radio stations, and I don't know how many books it sold. You never know, because you get the little checks from Kindle and from Amazon and so on and so forth, and you have no way of knowing where those sales come from.
Right, and the one thing you have to look at is the more you talk about it, the more you're on a radio or a newspaper article like in The View or wherever, the more your name becomes recognizable. So even if they didn't buy the first book, if they heard your name before and then you're talking about it again on the second book or the third book, they go, I've heard of him. Right. And that might entice them to go and pick up that third book, even if they didn't buy it the first time. So I always tell people, if you have an opportunity to do a show, you need to do that show. Don't pass up opportunity.
Oh, never ever. That's one golden rule I always had, was never pass up an opportunity, no matter where it is, what the venue, or for how long. If it's for 3 minutes, never pass it up. You never know what's going to come from it.
I got a call from a radio station about my book, and they wanted to do an interview, and I says, oh, absolutely, couldn't wait. Mm-hmm. And it was live in New York. So and it was drive time, so I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, because it was 6 o'clock in the morning in New York.
Wow.
To do it. Oh, my God. And now I got to go to work.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And so many places that I've talked to people in Tennessee, in Kentucky, Arizona, Washington, and each one of the hosts has a little different turn on the way they handle things, and it's really kind of unique. I love getting a prescript in the mail about what the show will entail, so that I'm not caught off guard. But those that you go in cold turkey and they just start, they're kind of neat too, because then it lets you talk about things that you weren't going to talk about before.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with anyone's format. I think it's great however they do it. I've done a few shows myself, for my own work. So, and actually I've done shows to talk about being a radio host. So, and it is interesting how we all do things differently. Yeah. I remember we had a good friend who had a show, and I was really surprised because he'd been on my show many times. That was Don. Yeah. And I did his show, and I was on for 4 minutes, and I felt like, I only get 4 minutes. You're on an hour. But, we all do things differently, and we all have our own format. But it's the opportunity that's important, like Stephen was saying. Yeah. Well, we got off topic. Our topic was the writer in you. And I think what's interesting to me, I think back, and I can only speak for myself, of what it was like for me to start writing. I don't even know sometimes if we realize we have the ability. A lot of people will, I'll give you an example. A lot of people I know who are well educated will often say to you, you really aren't a writer because you don't have that degree. And I think that you can't let someone steer you in a direction that you want to go in just because they're going to put a thought idea in your head that you don't have what it takes to be a writer when it comes to education or whatever. I think what's important is that if you feel like you can write something and you have a story in you and you want to tell it, there are so many ways to go out there and do that. And we have editors to take care of the logistics of how to write or forming a syntax or, spelling. Boy, that's my worst subject was spelling. But anyway, there are ways to do it. And I don't think you should ever let anyone tell you can't be a writer if that's your desire. Especially when it comes to someone saying, because we all know, or the people on this panel know, well, Andy, if you didn't know, you're going to know now. There are an average of 300 new authors every day.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. And that's because of the self-publishing, arena now. I mean, you can go out there, like Pam was saying, and publish on CreateSpace. You can do it in a day. It doesn't take that long. Once you have it ready to go and it's formatted, you just upload it, and you're on the internet in 24 hours.
Yep.
Yes.
So, you can do this if you want to, but the point we were all making is that it's not just having the writer in you that's important. If you're writing for yourself or you're writing for your family or you're just writing for the joy and don't really care if it sells much or not, that's fantastic. That's really the best way to go about it. But if you're writing and thinking, I'm going to make a fortune off of this, you better get prepared because now the hard part's starting.
Well,
I think that there's so many authors out there that if you're writing to make a fortune, you shouldn't be writing. I think you should write because you love the writing, and I don't think it's the education. I think it's experience.
Yeah.
The different, because every time you write a book, you're putting a little piece of something in your life is going into that book.
Right.
So you have to have some kind of experience, or a crazy mind helps too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
A unique point of view.
Yeah. But for me, the writer inside, it started when I was young. I started off when I was in junior high, a friend of mine and I, we decided we were going to write this newspaper called Transylvania Times because we had no sense and had no idea what we were doing. So we actually did our own illustrations. They were like cartoon characters of all your Frankenstein and werewolf and all that. And then we'd put little captions under it. And then we would print them out. We'd go have copies made. And we'd go up and down the neighborhood and put them on people's door. And we thought, well, we have our own newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, no one ordered them. We just gave them to them. So that's where I think my writing started, really, was there. What about you, Stephen?
Well, as I said, mine really started when I decided to write the book about my travels. And I don't know where it came from. I was just having lunch and I suddenly thought, I really need to put all these experiences down on paper. And I sat down and outlined the book and discovered a real joy of writing at that time and haven't stopped since.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought I'd be writing romance fiction. I certainly never thought I'd be writing murder mysteries either. But I just enjoy the challenge and the creativity and the imagination. I don't have the notepads like you guys all do, but I get my thoughts when I'm driving along. And I might be driving to the bank and I think, oh, you know what, that's an idea to put in the book. And I just dash it in a little filing cabinet in my mind and then I
my
pull it
mind
out of
doesn't
the
work
file
that well.
cabinet. That's how it has to work.
Yeah, I don't have that filing cabinet. So, Pam, when you're writing, because you write so much, does your mind work that well? Do you store it in your mind and then go back later? Or?
Yeah, I do. And he just mentioned about when you're driving along.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Yes.
I took a vacation not too long ago, and on the trip, I just saw like a railroad car on the side of the road, and I thought, I wonder what would be in that railroad car. And I ended up writing a book about a werewolf called Phases, just because that had fascinated me as we drove by. So it's just little things. You never know what you see that might trigger something in your head, and the next thing you know, you've got a story.
We did an experiment on the show. I think, Jan, you were on the show when we did this once, where we said there was 4 of us on the panel, and we decided that we were going to create a story from an
Right.
object. And someone said, well, let's just take a toothbrush.
Right. That
And-
was with Lance and Rich.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
actually did create a story from a simple little toothbrush. And it kind of got elaborate. I mean, it became a murder mystery. So that's what we talk about when we're saying the writer inside. We're actually talking about it's that creativity.
The creative.
You know, I don't even know if I can answer where it comes from. I don't think there is an answer for where it comes from. Because you could be the most educated person in the world and still not be able to create something, you know, like that. So it's really kind of neat to be able to do that. I feel privileged that you know, we have that creativity.
Yeah.
Anyone have a thought on that?
It's good to be creative. How's that?
Well, it is it's like anything. We're all given different gifts and different talents. And I think sometimes it can be developed, but I'm not too sure as it can actually be taught. It's like
Right.
painters, that their talent can be developed, or singers. If you don't have the singing voice, you're never going to be able to sing no matter how many classes or lessons, university degrees you go through. It's not going to happen. And that's probably the same with writing. You know, the practice and training can help, but I think there's got to be some inherent creativity inside the body for it to actually happen.
Andy, you were going to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the more you practice that muscle, the more you're going to see those railroad cars and create werewolves inside.
Yes.
Because that's not something you might have done 6 years ago. But now that you've been building that muscle, so it's like any other muscle. I really think that.
Well, again, on the interview with Grisham, he was talking about how he forces himself to write 1 page a day. Because he said he found when he was writing his first novel that he would often go for 2 weeks without writing anything, and you start thinking, I'm never going to finish this. Now, I really wish I was that disciplined, because I am not. But, you know, he might have something to that, but for me, that's difficult to say I'm going to set this side of time every day. I suppose if that's all you're doing, it'd be a lot easier, because in the everyday hectic life of trying to make a living and doing all the things you have to do, it's not always that easy or that cut and dry for everyone.
Right.
But it would be nice to think that you can set aside every day and say, I'm going to write this much every day.
I have been advised to set office hours, and I actually make a sign to put on my den door, you know, from 5 to 7 or whatever. But I find if I get stuck, you know, suddenly the refrigerator needs cleaning really badly.
Diversions, yeah.
Well, you know, amazingly enough, when we had our horses, going out and cleaning stalls and that sort of stuff gives your mind a lot of time to create things, so that you can then come back and be creative by getting away from the work. So sometimes sitting there and just actually trying to do the work, it should just flow naturally. So to have a set time to do it doesn't work for me. Something will click in my head and I'm off and down at the computer. And that may be at 10 o'clock at night or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, well, with me, with my everything else I have going on, if I don't set a time, it just won't happen.
Yeah. Pam?
I don't set aside a time, but I know that like I will be writing and then I'll move away to go do something and just be standing somewhere else, and all of a sudden everything will just come to me and I have to go back and say, oh my gosh, this is what I need to write down, you know. But it's not there when you're looking at the book that you're writing. You have to step away and then it hits you.
For me, it's the same way. I mean, you know, like I talked about yesterday, after I started writing, I had to go somewhere, and then it hit me, and I'm thinking, I need to be home. I need to be writing this down. So I did. As soon as I took a piece of paper and wrote down notes, and then I set them by the computer. They're still sitting there. But the thing is that, you know, it comes to me anytime. And you were talking, Stephen, how you're driving and you think of something.
Or just wandering around the supermarket or something. I'm formulating the ideas for when I do set aside my time, and I just formulate the ideas as I'm driving or getting dressed in the shower, things churning around in my mind. But I think it helps too. If I would recommend for anybody is, might not be so easy for Pam in Montana, but have a critique group, and ours does meet every 2 weeks, and they're an enormous help because you have to take something you've written. You can't just show up empty-handed. So we're forced to write something at least every 2 weeks, even if we don't get to write something every day, which I can't either. I do have to find something to take to that meeting. So
one of the things you do
comes
that I don't do is you are disciplined when it comes to Facebook. You know, all your social networks. I can't do that. I admire you that you do that. And Jan, you do the same thing. You know, you're always on Facebook. I have a difficult time being disciplined just to do that, which, by the way, Andy, is very important. That's just as important as the writing, because you have to make sure that people are on the up and up of what you're doing next.
Right.
Yes.
And Pam, are you on Facebook? Do you go on Facebook and write all the time? Or I don't know how you would have time.
Yes, she is.
I'm on Facebook all the time. I have a page that is just for my books, and then my personal page too. But and I like it. Twitter makes me crazy because there's so much. I mean, you could write one tweet, and when you post it, there's 1,000 more on there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just too much for me. But I do like Facebook.
Well, the Writer
And
Inside
I think it's important to have an author page
yeah.
on Facebook. That's
Yeah,
separate.
I actually have one for the radio show, too.
Yeah.
This is all part of the Writer Inside, actually, because you have to utilize that talent when it comes to letting people know about your work or what you're doing as well. So that's all part of it. We're down to the last minute of the show, so I'd like to thank my guests, Stephen Murray, Andi Scully, and Pamela Winn, along with my co-host, Janet Corsi. And if you'll log on to YouTube at youtube.com/aspects of writing, you'll see our past shows on there. And hopefully in a couple weeks, we'll have the studio running even smoother, and we'll actually be recording live shows that'll be posted immediately to YouTube. And if you need to know future lineups, just go to aspectsofwriting.com. That's aspectsofwriting.com. And until next time, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. You can write it. And thank you for everyone for being on the show. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
James.
Thank you. Thanks, Jan.
Good
Thanks,
meeting you.
Jan.
Thank you.